Matthew chapters 23 to 25, the King's pronouncements on issues current and future. As the Lord increasingly prepares to leave this world, he has things to say to his disciples about how they are to behave, and some stinging condemnations of the religious leaders who have rejected him. He also has a great deal to say about what will happen in the future prior to his glorious return. Respecting office, not character, chapter 23, verses 1 to 12. Actually, Jesus' remarks in this section were addressed to the crowds as well as to the disciples. His first statement exhorted them to show respect for the position held by the scribes and Pharisees. The job of a scribe was first to understand the law of God and then to explain and expound it to others. This was an important office. When Jesus said that those doing so were sitting in Moses' seat, he meant that they were performing the responsibilities Moses once fulfilled, of explaining and applying the commandments of God. For this reason, their instructions were to be respected and obeyed. Sadly, Jesus had to say that they should listen to these teachers, but not copy their behaviour, because the scribes and Pharisees were hypocrites, saying one thing and doing another. What an unhappy thing it is when people who instruct others in what God's word says just want to appear righteous rather than to take the trouble to act righteously. God will still humble people who exalt themselves by empty words and deceptive actions, and he will still exalt those who are genuinely humble before him. Woeful condemnation, verses 13 to 33. In this section, Jesus announced, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites," 7 times. The actions condemned differed each time, but the message was consistent. They had taken the position of and accepted the respect for being leaders of God's people, but they had led the people away from God and had actively tried to prevent them from entering the kingdom. While pretending to be wise, clear-sighted guides, they had in fact been blind and had led their followers into a ditch. They had focused on the outward appearance of things, like cleaning the outside of cups and dishes, but they were like beautifully whitened graves, bright and shining on the surface, but full of death and corruption underneath. Like hypocrites in every age, they might deceive people for a while, since human beings can only see the surface of other people's lives, but God is never deceived. The final judgment of those who pretend to be righteous while leading those who follow them into condemnation will be severe. Impending desolation, verses 34 to 39. The king then went on to speak about what would happen in the decades that immediately followed his rejection. God would continue to send his messengers to the people of Israel, but the nation and its leaders would continue to reject and persecute them. Israel had been in rebellion against God for hundreds of years, with only occasional periods of repentance and restoration. The human race had been disobedient from the days of Adam and Eve. Therefore, Jesus said, God was going to impose long-deferred judgment, and it was going to fall on this generation. If that seems a little unfair, we must remember that this was the generation which had been given the fulfillment of all the prophecies about the promised Messiah. Their king had arrived, and they rejected him, and were about to kill him. Jerusalem was the centre of the national life of Israel. It was the city where the descendants of King David had reigned, and the site of God's temple. Yet it was also the place where the prophets had been stoned and killed, and it was about to be the site of the most wicked act of all, the crucifixion of the king. Jesus was prophesying about the destruction of Jerusalem, which occurred around 70 AD, and said that they would not see him again until they proclaimed, "Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." The crowd had used just those words back in chapter 21, when Jesus had entered the city. The same words will be used again and followed through to deliverance when Jesus returns in glory to save Israel. Future desolation, chapter 24, verses 1 to 28. The previous denunciations had occurred within the temple. Jesus then departed from there with the disciples and climbed the hill towards the Mount of Olives. The disciples pointed back at the spectacular buildings they had just left, drawing Jesus' attention to their beauty. They must have been very surprised when Jesus said that all this would be utterly destroyed. This destruction happened around 40 years from then, as we noted earlier, but the disciples assumed Jesus was talking about the end of the age and asked him to explain about the signs of that time. So Jesus began to speak to them about what we sometimes call the end times. He said there will be many false Christs, and both actual wars and rumours of them. Famine, pestilence and earthquake will also mark those times, but this will be just the beginning of the sorrows. Those who follow God in that time will endure persecution and martyrdom, being hated by all nations. Hatred and betrayal will be routine, and wickedness will increase. It is clear that Jesus was speaking about the time after the church has been taken to heaven, when the preaching of the kingdom will commence again, and world events will focus on the nation of Israel. There have been wars, earthquakes, etc. in all ages, but this will be a period of unparalleled concentration of all these disruptions. The events, according to prophecies in the book of Daniel, will occur over a 7-year period, with particular escalation halfway through that time. All false prophets and false Christs are to be ignored, because the genuine return of Christ will be so spectacular and worldwide that it cannot be mistaken. The King returns, verses 29 to 31. At the darkest point, with Jerusalem surrounded, many of the nation killed, and the triumph of Israel's enemies seeming inevitable, Christ will return in glory and be seen simultaneously across the world. This will cause delight for the persecuted nation and mourning for the many enemies. Angels will gather together the persecuted people who will have been scattered all over the earth as they have fled from the tribulation. Related warnings, verses 32 to 51. Having given this summary of events, Jesus detailed some of the signs of that return, as the disciples had requested. First, he told a parable about a fig tree, saying that the budding fig is the indication of the coming summer. Likewise, the troubles that he had just related will be the signs of his imminent return. Having said that his words were more certain and long-lasting than even heaven and earth, he warned that nobody can fully calculate the time of his return, since it is a secret known only to God the Father. The return of the King will be like the arrival of the flood in Noah's day, said Jesus. Everyday life will continue as normal until it's abruptly cut off by judgment. Those who will live through the days that Jesus was foretelling must be constantly alert and ready for his return, for he will come when least expected, like a burglar in the night. The King will reward those who are faithfully waiting for him, but will bring judgment for those who think his return is perpetually delayed and who therefore sink into sinfulness. In chapter 25, Jesus told 2 parables about his return, and then gave an account of some events which will occur immediately after his return in glory. The parable of 10 virgins, chapter 25, verses 1 to 13. In this well-known story, 10 virgins went out with lamps to meet a bridegroom. 5 wise virgins took extra oil with them, and 5 foolish ones did not. All 10 slept. But at midnight, when somebody announced that the bridegroom was coming, the 5 wise virgins trimmed the wick of their lamps, added oil, and went out to meet him. The 5 foolish virgins tried to borrow oil from the wise, but were sent off to buy their own supplies. While they were gone, the groom arrived, and the door was closed. They were not admitted on their return, and the groom disowned them. Jesus' conclusion was, "Watch therefore, for you know neither the day nor the hour in which the Son of Man is coming." Given its position in Jesus' discourse on his return in glory, this parable must be about those in Israel who will be waiting for Christ's return after the church has been taken to heaven. Just as in the church age, when some who profess Christianity are real while others are not sincere, at that time some in Israel will be like the wise virgins, genuinely waiting for Christ's return, while others will have an outward appearance of faith, but no real life within them. When Jesus returns in glory, it will be too late for the impostors to change sides. The parable of the talents, verses 14 to 30. Next, Jesus said the kingdom of heaven was like a man making a journey, who gave his servants different amounts of money according to their differing abilities to trade with while he was away. On his return, the servants presented themselves to the master and gave an account of what they had done. The servant given 5 talents had gained 5 more. Likewise, the servant given 2 talents had doubled this amount. They were both given the same commendation. Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. The servant who had been given 1 talent buried it in the ground. He told his master that he had thought he was a harsh man, had been afraid of offending him by losing the money, and had therefore simply hidden it. Although the parable is again told about the service of Israelites in the future, it's easy to apply to our time as well. Reward will be according to faithfulness with what has been committed to us. Failure to do anything at all and a total misconception of the master's character are evidence of never really knowing him at all. Jesus said this was yet another example of the reversal of things at his appearing. Sheep and goats, verses 31 to 46. Verse 31 tells us that the events related will occur when the Son of Man comes in his glory and all the holy angels with him, when he will sit on the throne of his glory. Evidently, this is the same glorious return of the King referred to in verses 29 to 31 of the previous chapter. In that chapter, Jesus was mostly concerned with the implications of his return for the nation of Israel. In this section, the focus is on the implications for the Gentile nations. These nations will be separated into the categories of sheep and goats, based on their behaviour towards the least of these my brethren. In the context of these chapters, these brethren cannot be literal young children or the church. They have to be the faithful people in the nation of Israel during the time of tribulation. Those who have treated such people well will have given evidence of the real faith in their hearts. Their actions will be considered by Christ as representing acceptance of himself, and they will be welcomed into the kingdom which he is then setting up, which we call the millennium. This is the kingdom that was preached by John, Christ, and the disciples, but was never established at that time due to the unbelief of the nation. Again, it is simple and reasonable to make an application to our own time and recognise Jesus' identification of himself with his own people. What an encouragement it is to know that Jesus feels all the things done to his own, either positive or negative, as if they were done to himself. That's how much he loves us.